Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
The point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem, the infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief?
Okay, great. I have, by the way, a topic that I would like to discuss if it resonates with either of you. I mean, or with both of you. I think in this general scheme of Athens and Jerusalem, an interesting sort of special case is that of I don't know what word really to use, but I would use maybe the concept of revelation. I mean, the fact that well, I mean, all major religions are sort of, how would I say, organized around the concept that whatever we call God has somehow revealed himself or sort of spoken to humanity through a certain person or channel. And I think it would be interesting to discuss, like, is that, how feasible or a concept that is, and how should we understand these claims that certain people, there haven't been really that many people, but I mean, anyway, a handful of people throughout history have claimed to be sort of the ambassadors of divinity or something like that.
Oh, large numbers have. Only a few have
been. Oh, okay.
gone
So
on
there
to
are
found
more.
religions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
determine the true from the false? Are there true? And if so, how do you subset the true from the false?
Yeah, and I mean, generally speaking, I mean, I think there are lots of questions that arise from. I mean, if we assume that there is a God by the sort of general philosophical definition, then the question becomes, so what would be the relationship of this divinity with humankind? And is there a relationship? Is there a contact? I mean, like, does God just sort of create existence and then sort of withdraw to sit on the porch and enjoy the sunset, or and leave humanity to figure out what they're gonna do next? Or you see what I mean?
To start the conversation there is already to begin halfway in.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's already assuming a whole lot about
Yeah.
what we're calling God.
Yes, exactly.
It's already assuming that God is some sort of being who's
has a will, or exactly. Yeah.
And there are other ways of thinking about it, particularly
exactly.
An earlier starting point would at least look at language itself and like the limitations of language in conveying concepts. And the fact, whenever we open our mouths and start talking about these sorts of
yeah,
metaphysical subjects, we're already using words that
yeah.
have a freighted history that don't necessarily. And Plato understood this in one of his dialogues. He asks, do words carve nature at its joints? And this must have come up at some point in our conversations. And well, we have no guarantee that in these metaphysical, theological areas that words carve nature at its joints at all. One real possibility is that all of these words are just narrative constructions, and they may be more or less aligned with ultimate reality, which is beyond
Yeah.
word. And the only way to really tell is by deploying those words in our lives, and generating fruit from them, because by their fruit you shall know them.
Yeah.
Which would also imply that, talking about it and arguing about, well, is this logical or not, and what are the, is this rational or not? Already, the whole concept of logic and rationality means it implies and already presupposes that you're starting with certain premises.
Absolutely.
And then from those premises, you can talk logically or not, and you can say, oh, but you skipped a step there. Okay, fine. But it all depends on the premise more than
absolutely,
at least as much as the logical sequence of arguments that follow from the premise. And when we're talking about these sorts of things like God and the world and Athens and Jerusalem and all of that, we're already, each of the three of us, as well as every person on the planet, already has in their own mind some set of premises, from which things follow. Well, can we identify what those premises are? And can we agree on a set of premises? And if the answer to that is no, which I suspect that it is, then we're left with, well, be as logical as you can given your premises, but given the fact that we're all going to have different premises that are not themselves logical, that are cultural, that have to do with our own makeup of our minds, which is very different from one person to the other. Given that, the best we can do then is just have open conversations, listen to each other, argue in good faith, and look at the evidence. That's kind of, it's messy, but I feel like that's like the reality of where we are in this topic. We're never going to discover the key, the logical argument that's going to satisfy everybody that somehow has never been discovered before. The ancient Greeks never discovered it. Aristotle never thought it. These people are all way smarter than us. They didn't come up with any logically conclusive argument about any of these deeper topics, to the extent that, who was it? David Chalmers, the modern philosopher, took a survey of professional philosophers on these fundamental questions, nominalism versus realism, God or no God, different sorts of ethics, the basic questions. And he found that working philosophers had zero agreement on any of these questions, despite them having been debated rationally and logically now, in some cases, for thousands of years. And zero agreement has been reached. And if that itself is not evidence of some sort for what we're dealing with, then I don't know what is. I mean, and it may sound like a very pessimistic conclusion that, well, we're messy creatures with all sorts of conflicting biases and premises, and we're thrust into this world, and we have to find some way of getting along. But I'm afraid that's what it is. Yeah.
But I was wondering, because the question Cameron stated was okay, if there exists, we could call it God or divinity or whatever, but if something exists it's beyond the physical world in this meaning, how is human actually able to to get in contact with this? And then we could ask that, okay, maybe some people have or in a way or another are able to sense this part of reality in a different way than the rest of us. This is like how I understood Cameron.
Yeah. In which case, yeah, we're saying let's all, for the sake of having a conversation, start with this premise and then see where it goes.
Yeah. I mean, you have to build any such scenario on certain premises, as you said. Otherwise, like, okay, we could start before that. I mean, and talk about, like, what are different ways in which one can think of something as it were superhuman or metaphysical. Because yes, obviously, I mean, if you think of the traditional religion in the Abrahamic religions, this kind of a father figure God, very different from, for instance, the Indian religions, where divinity is almost like a secondary issue, especially in Buddhism. So I mean, even within world religions, the way that divinity has been represented is very different, isn't it? And
It's so hard to think oneself out of the box into which one was born.
yeah, exactly.
As Wittgenstein said, we're like all flies trapped in a bottle. It's an invisible glass bottle, and the object of philosophy is to get out of the fly bottle. But doing that is very difficult when you can't see it. You don't know necessarily when you're still inside the bottle because the walls are invisible. And you might fool yourself into thinking that you've escaped the bottle, but you're still inside it because you can't see
And then
the
the
wall.
question is there any space other, I mean, are you just transferring from one bottle to another, or
Yes.
is there some free
Yes.
space that is not bottled? You see, because
Yes.
I'm afraid that as Wittgenstein himself, I mean, like, language is in a way a game. I mean, like, and as you said, there are certain premises within which we have to operate. I mean,
Yes.
nobody can be totally free in their thinking.
And in the question of questioning the premise, in the line of questioning that premise, what's better about being outside the bottle versus inside the bottle?
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually better for the
To be
fly to
inside,
be inside the
inside
fly
the
bottle.
bottle. Yeah.
It's a safer environment. You're less likely to be snapped up by a passing bird.
Yeah.
So maybe we want to stay inside the bottle.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah,
there's
that's a
always a
good point.
premise. There's
Yeah.
always a premise.
But if we think that this difference between inside and outside the bottle is not really the question, but that, like, being inside the bottle also should have a non-visible, non-physical dimension that has also really have some impact on us as human beings. Then the question would be like, but how are we as human beings able to get in contact with this dimension of life that is also, I mean, it's still inside, but it still have, I believe it has impact on our life, that we have, like, even though we are not aware of these questions, we even create understandings that we are like fighting against them or trying to escape from this part of reality. But then, of course, it might not be like a divinity, or it might even not be like a universal insights in this dimension either, but it's still like questions that we have to like try to get in contact with in some way or another.
I think that's one of the biggest questions we can ask is whether the world in which we find ourselves has, if there are larger purposes at foot or not. I think that's the most fundamental question. And that your average physicist would say, no, there's no larger purpose afoot. There's just laws of physics and a very complicated soup of particles mixing and remixing, and consciousness just arises out of that, etc. And we make our own rules, and we make our own try to organize it and think about it and all that, but there's no larger ought connected to the is. And how do you, but others would say that there is a fundamental ought in the universe, apart from the is. and how that if it's true that there is an ought apart from the is, then already there are different ways of thinking about how that might impact the world in which we live. One way in which it might impact, following on the suggestion you just made, Knut, is to say, well, let's look for evidence of spirit in the world. Let's look for, let's say, if mind is a thing, then mind over matter must be a thing. And if maybe we can find the effect of spiritual forces in the world. And there are a lot of people moving in that direction. There are a lot of people asking, well, if you pray, does prayer have an effect on your health or the health of others? If you think about an object, can you get some extra information about it if you focus on an object, even if there's a screen between you and it? There's all sorts of ways people have thought of proving out the premise that there is some extra layer of mind or intentionality, I'll call it ought, that's superimposed upon the world of is. But that's not the only way of thinking about how it might be effective. I mean, that's kind of a dualistic way of thinking how it might be effective. That there's an invisible layer that's somehow interacting with this visible layer of the world. I mean, another way of thinking about it is, well, is and ought are intertwined in this physical world, and the world is one, not two. And so the ought, the dimension of mind, the dimension of purpose, is part of this world rather than some invisible layer that's attached to this world. It's possible that mind operates in the world in a way that's more seamlessly associated with matter than the way we let's say traditionally think about it as some sort of ghostly addition or some fifth force or whatever. And this is where, I don't know, it's difficult to articulate what that might mean, but it could mean something like, and I think I brought this up in past conversations, the ideas that some physical cosmologists have had, theoretical cosmologists have had, that, well, maybe the universe comes into being through an active observation, because we know there's something weird going on in a quantum mechanical system, that it's just possibility until a measurement is made, and then it becomes actuality. Well, what is that measurement process? And is consciousness somehow attached to it? And if so, then, well, which consciousness is attached to it? Does anything count as consciousness? And there's a lot of unanswered questions there, but maybe at the furthermost limit, the universe comes into being through an act of observation. And well, what's doing the observation? The universe itself. But these are all speculations, but the interesting thing about these speculations to me is that they move in a direction which is not dualistic fundamentally in the sort of Cartesian sense, but it validates the reality and centrality of consciousness and the ought, let's call it the ought dimension, and posits that it's part of the is dimension in a different way than the more dualistic ways of thinking about it. It's a different premise. You're starting with a different premise, but you're trying to argue to the same conclusion, i.e., that yes, there is an ought, and it is meaningful, and it's something that we're just not making up. We're not just inventing meaning, like the existentialists would say. The universe is meaningless, and you just have to go and create your own personal meaning. This would say, no, there's meaning out there. It's almost like a field that we're born, like a magnetic field, and we're born into it, and it's invisible, and we want to orient ourselves with it. But there are more ways of thinking about it than the sort of Cartesian dualistic sense. I've tried to articulate this in the past in our conversations, but I think unsuccessfully.
No, I recognize this, but I have he's now passed away, unfortunately, very prematurely. But I had this very close friend who was a internationally renowned chemist, actually, and he had this interesting sort of model or model thinking that where he drew attention to the fact that we cannot actually recognize X dimension without actually the existence of X plus one dimension.
Hmm.
So because you can say, for instance, that, if you think of a one-dimensional universe like a line, but a line actually is not one-dimensional, because when you draw a line, it actually has also a thickness, right?
Mhm.
And if that thickness was brought to zero, you wouldn't be able to even see the line. So the only way that you can actually observe a line is by having a two-dimensional universe where the line, is the edge of that.
That's
And
interesting.
likewise, if you think of any number of dimensions, you realize that it always requires the existence of a higher dimension, so that that dimension can be actually observed or separated. I think that's an interesting sort of thought game, which sort of leads to the fact that whatever sort of definition we give reality, it still requires something on a higher level for that to actually be, how would I say, observable or analyzable.
Hmm.
I think
It's
this
interesting
could
that
also
the
be.
example. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think this could also be explained very simple by saying that if reality is not only a chaos, that we actually have like something we could like categorize into different kind of like substantives, for instance, or substance. We wouldn't be able to do this without there was some kind of measurement beneath this standard, and I even believe that this measurement is something that is not coming from human, but it's something that is in existence. Stephen?
The example of the line, I see it like in terms of observation, you can't observe a line without it having some thickness. But in your imagination, it doesn't need to have any thickness. So that n+1 argument like works in the world that we observe, but in that sort of pure Platonic realm of thought, you don't need to have, the line doesn't need to have thickness. The line can have zero thickness in the Platonic form realm of geometry. It's just the imperfection, and any thickness to that line would be an imperfection, Plato would say. But yeah, although realistically, it does have to have some thickness when we observe it. But anyway, that was just a minor point.
I'm still trying to get back to Cameron's first, like this idea about revelation, or maybe like, because I think that we often we in this podcast also we are very logical thinkers, and we are trying to to bring arguments and dialogue and all these things. But then about revelation and about, I think this is not something that you might not be able to to have a method, or to have like, this is how I will experience something. I think we have been discussing this also, but that sometimes we just have experiences that we were not ready for, but we just get them, and then these have so huge impact on us that actually something is changed inside us. And then of course, what is the, how to express this, how to put words on, and then has this something to do with divinity? Has this something to do with the universal, eternal, this feeling of being connected to cosmos, to universe, or I don't know what kind of, how to express these feelings that we have. I remember, Stephen, you were talking about this painting of I don't Jackson
Pollock, yeah.
Pollock, yes. For instance, or Cameron was talking about music and
Yeah. The dimension of the mystical seems indispensable in, like, take Christianity. You know, suppose none of us had heard about Christianity, and someone comes along and says, you know, this is true, capital T true. And we say, okay, great, let's examine it. So what do we have to examine it with? Well, we have this book, you know, called the Bible. A few thousand words of it are the actual words of Jesus. So we can focus on that first, and then look at the words around it, the stories that have been told about him. We can look at the followers of Jesus today. We can look at music that's been written, inspired by, you know, by belief in these words. We can look at cathedrals, art, and so forth. That's kind of what we have tangibly. But then we also have the experience we have when we read these words. And it seems to me ultimately you have to come down to that experience you have when you read the words. Because absent that, the words themselves don't prove themselves to you. I mean, because you have to start with a certain premise for those words to even make any sense. You know, it starts with God. It starts with a premise that if you're coming in from the outside, why should you accept that premise? That's a problem with any logical argument. It's a problem with any self-consistent a system as it may be. It requires you to jump inside this self-consistent bubble. And why should you take that leap when there's so many other bubbles out there? There's so many other consistent sets of ideas out there. And hey, they've produced great works of art, and they've produced communities of people who have done some great things and also some terrible things. And that's the case with all of these competing belief systems, which all claim to be capital T truth. What are we supposed to do? At some point, you have to go on, well, I had an experience of, I had some internal resonance or something that convinced me that this thing was true. But if you go that direction, then what do you say to the person next to you who says, well, I didn't have that experience reading these words. I've never had that experience. Or a third person who says, well, I had that experience reading these other words. And I read those words and I thought they were ridiculous. And this other person read those words and they had a profound experience. So we're back to the problem of premises, and we're back to the problem of personal experiences which can't be communicated. And here we are, I don't know, talking about it using words, thinking we can actually get at the truth.
And I really like this idea about internal resonance.
Yeah.
And it's that I think I've read a lot of words in my life, and like everything from philosophy to religious text and so on. And sometimes, you know, I'm trying to have like to just think about them, and, you know, to remember them and try to understand the problem they are consulting or trying to bring into life. But sometimes it is like I have this like really that it's not only a question of thinking, but it's also like feeling that you are feeling something inside you, that this resonates so much with how I understand reality, or this is actually, it's like, yes, I have, in a way, I can even feel sometimes that this is something I should have said myself, but it's like this one is coming just in the moment that I read the words. It's like, yes, this is exactly what I was thinking of at the same time, or, you know, having these very strong feeling of resonance. And of course, this I think is extremely important. And yeah, okay, maybe we are missing, or there are like some are saying this and some are saying that, but maybe if we try to, you know, to how to say it, not to analyze, but more to synthesize what is expressed in these different
metaphors or whatever they are using. Is there something that is something that we could feel is wisdom to us all in a divine meaning?
I strongly believe that's the case. That there's a common thread behind these experiences that people have, the experiences of the sacred that take many different forms, that are catalyzed by different words expressed through different cultural norms, not always even through words, but sometimes through art or through music or through visual media and so forth. I mean, my own personal experience going back to Jackson Pollock, for me, that was kind of a huge moment, because, standing in front of this painting and having this, experience, which is very subjective and private, for me, it was important to me, because I realized that the thing that I had previously really just associated with a religious experience could be had, in a secular context, what I would have labeled as a secular context. And it suddenly just blew open my whole frame of reference to realize, oh, the sacred, what I've called and thought of as the sacred, can be found in a vastly greater number of places than I had thought before. And when you come to that understanding, suddenly you're open to experiencing the sacred in these other formerly alien forms, and you realize, oh, outside, when I strip away the unnecessary packaging, and the unnecessary packaging is, well, what other people might think of as necessary, ideas like God's existence, theological, certainties and so forth. That's part of the packaging. And when you strip away those theological certainties, what remains is this core experience of the sacred. Rudolf Otto, for example, talks about very eloquently in The Idea of the Holy back in 1920 or something like that. And I think that is I think that's more than just, I don't know, that's more than just a personal realization. I feel like it can be the foundation for something that can have a good effect in the world, because what the world needs today is love, and it needs love of other, and it needs acceptance of and recognition and validation of the other. And one way we can get to that is by recognizing and validating the experiences of the sacred that other people and other cultures have had. And sometimes the barriers to recognizing that experience of the sacred in other cultures are extremely high, because there's a whole different set of premises that you have to jump into that other world and have that experience of the sacred. Some of us never have it. Some of us are very lucky to have had it. I mean, another example, just drawing from my own personal experience, the years I spent in Israel and studying Arabic and studying Hebrew, and in some small way being able to jump into a sort of a different cultural context and having an experience of the sacred through that cultural context. I remember waking up early in the morning and listening to Arabic AM radio, while in Haifa, and listening to the Quran being chanted. Every morning, the Quran would be chanted. And for most Westerners, this is a very alien, very alienating kind of a thing. You associate it with this other culture, which is not simpatico with your culture. But for those moments, I was sort of in that frame of mind, studying the language and trying to get inside their experience of the sacred. I had truly profound, elevating experiences listening to the Quran being chanted, at AM radio in these morning hours. And having had those experiences, I think, enables one to identify that common thread that binds together all of humanity into one sort of into one family, really. But to do that, you have to be able to dispense with the packaging, and we're so focused on the packaging, which is the set of theological presuppositions and certain cultural norms and certain all of the things that people say this is religion. And in a way, yeah, depending on how you define the word religion, yeah, these things are religion. But in another sense, in the Rudolf Otto sense, it's not. You know, true religion is this very almost undefinable thing that no words can properly evoke for everybody, that can only be experienced, that not everyone can even, I think everyone can experience it, but not everyone does experience it. And most people who do experience it only in a very specific cultural context, which tends to lead more to kind of tribalization of the human experience rather than universalization. So the real challenge is trying to identify where is that experience of the sacred to be found, and trying to invite people in to what otherwise might be alien manifestations of that expression of the sacred, because it breaks down something. It, like, just having one of those experiences is once in your life, I think, would profoundly change the world if everyone were to have that.
Yeah, I think in the Baha'i sacred writings, there's this reference to the fact that we should recognize and appreciate light no matter which source it comes from. So I think that's sort of similar to what you're saying. I mean, you can see light in the sunshine, you can see light in a candle, you can see light in a light bulb, you can see it in a flame of gas or whatever, and it's secondary what sort of produces the light, or what is, because the light and the experience of light and what light does to your life is the same. Whether you walk into a dark room with a candle or you switch on the light bulb, it has the same effect. It makes to you visible things that you wouldn't otherwise see, or something along those lines. So yeah, I think we are just maybe used to different, or thinking that light can only come from a certain source. And then with what you were saying about this painting, I mean, I had in my very early teens, I had a similar experience the first time I went to a classical concert, heard a symphony being played. It was a totally, like, spiritually elevating, and it was just a fantastic experience. Yeah, and ever since then, I've always sought classical music as a way of getting spiritual nourishment.
But what more did you think of, Cameron, when you had this topic? What was your, because you were talking about this, there's someone who have this.
Yeah, I mean, I had more particularly, and as Stephen pointed out, of course, it's within a certain, because anyway, let's say in all monotheistic religions, there is this concept that there is someone who is some sort of a mediator, if you wish, between God and humanity, whether it's a Jesus, a Buddha, a Muhammad, whatever. And I just thought that would be, like, this whole concept of, I mean, obviously this is built on many premises, but if there is a God which is a purposeful God, so to say, and who has created humanity for a certain reason or purpose, then how would this contact between divinity and humanity, what sort of ways there would be for that contact to take place? I mean, would God want humanity to know why it exists? If there is a why, I mean, what that ought to be is, and if so, how would he communicate that to us?
And who is us? I mean, through most of history, humans were in effectively discontinuous tribal groupings. And, if God spoke to one person at a particular moment, there was no guarantee that would ever get across to the other side of the mountain range, let alone to some as yet undiscovered continent. So the whole sort of narrative framework of God speaking to humanity, leaving a book and then expecting everyone to follow this book already presupposes a certain sort of degree of connectivity between human beings that didn't
Exactly.
exist until just a few hundred years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I mean, but I mean, without now actually resolving the issue, but I mean, this is a question that I had anyway, that I think is worthwhile discussing and sort of unpackaging this, like.
But maybe we should dare really talk about Jesus, for instance, and what kind of person was he? What did he actually say? Did he say anything more than what is logical for any human that would dare to speak up for truth?
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, again, what you just said, I think, opens up also a new dimension to this whole thing because I mean, did, for instance, Jesus say something which was in those days somehow transformative or sort of like against the kind of way that everybody thought about reality? Or did he just say something that any sort of deep thinking person could have said?
Yeah. And did he write anything? Did he focus on a book?
And well, he definitely didn't write anything, that we know, yeah. But
as we know.
Yeah, exactly, as we know. Okay, so
I love a Beethoven symphony. Could Beethoven have written those symphonies without Bach having come before him, or without polyphonic music having been developed a few centuries before that? Any seemingly fresh infusion of some inspiration that drops straight out of heaven, like a great musical work, a great work of art. You can always say, well, that came straight from the divine, or you can say, well, that had to come inside a certain context, and certain things had to happen before this thing happened. So the Sermon on the Mount, could Jesus have said these things in the Sermon on the Mount without there having been previously, let's say, a Jewish people with a certain idea of relationship to God, a certain idea of rights and responsibilities and so forth? What are the preconditions of anything that we would term divine revelation? And is it helpful to make analogies to things like music and art? And if it's helpful, how? And if it fails, in what way does it fail? In what way does the musical analogy fail as a way of sort of pushing forward our understanding of the subject?
Good. Okay, let's
tend to make a lot about the music analogy, but maybe it's a bad one.
Yeah. Okay, so can we take this as our next topic? I mean, in the next discussion.
Of course we can. Should we go into some of the prophets? Because that's what I would say that they are in a way or another.
Exactly. Maybe even the question, who's a prophet? Or
yeah, that would be really interesting, because I was listening to OECD in September, and he was talking a lot about foresight, and he was able to see into the crystal bowl and tell us what would come in the future. So it's prophets. It's not anymore like a religious person.
Yeah. Exactly.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, and that you'll listen to us the next time too.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the broadcast voice and technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.